I'm Gary Feldman.
I'm Tamsin Kaplan.
So we're Davis Malm. We're two of the lawyers in the employment group. Welcome to our presentation on some new developments in employment law.
Obviously, all of our employees are engaged in social media in some way or another, certainly those who are under, 40. Of course, Gary is well over 40.
Thank you. No one was accused me of being under 40 lately.
Okay, so let's get to the first true or false for social media. An employer is allowed to conduct a thorough internet search to get information about a job applicant, including from Facebook and other social media. Is that true? How many for false? Okay, that is right. At this time in Massachusetts, you absolutely can go on Facebook, go on other social media sites, and check out an applicant for a job. Even more so, an employer may require a job applicant to provide usernames and passcodes for Facebook and or other social media as a condition of employment. Do you think that's true? True? False? Interesting. It is actually true. Currently, under the law in Massachusetts, you can require an applicant for a job to give you their login information so that you can check them out. What about a current employee? An employer may require a current employee to provide usernames and passcodes for Facebook and or other social media as a condition of continuing employment. Okay, we can do this with an applicant. Can we do this with a current employee? True? We can? False, we can't. False, we can't. Okay, so these guys are so sharp. So, but what's Bob? Hey, Bob, how are you?
Hi, Tamsin, how are you? Explain the legal logic to that.
I think I will.
How an employee has less legal protection than an applicant.
Okay. Well, the employee has more legal protection than the applicant. With the applicant, you can require login information. With the current employee, you cannot require login information. What is the difference and why? And it all goes back to the National Labor Relations Act. Yes, you have a question?
I was going to offer my guess.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No consideration for the second one on what's written there.
Have you gone to law school? That's a very good guess, and it may be that that's a possible analysis. But the main issue here is the National Labor Relations Act, because under the National Labor Relations Act, all employees have a right to concerted activity and this is whether they're unionized or non-unionized, for the purposes of collective bargaining, if they're unionized, or if they're non-unionized, they have the right to concerted activity, which is activity among 2 or more employees, for the purpose of mutual aid or protection, meaning that they can communicate, employees have a right to communicate with each other about the terms and conditions of their employment. And the National Labor Relations Board now construes the breadth of terms and conditions of employment to be huge, to be very, very broad. So essentially any communication that relates to how people are treated at work, how people would like to be treated at work, how their boss spoke to them today, whether they're not happy with the benefits the company offers, any of these issues are concerted activity, and people can communicate about them. That's what concerted activity is all about. So an applicant is not yet an employee, so they don't have these rights under the National Labor Relations Act. But once an employee, they're protected under the National Labor Relations Act, again, regardless of whether it's a union setting or a non-union setting. And therefore, we're not allowed to require them to allow us to view what they're saying on social media, potentially about the company and about their terms and conditions of employment. We can't ask for that as a condition of employment.
If you've asked for it when they were an applicant, and then you become an employee, can you...
Presumably you have that information.
But can you continue to access their accounts after you're an employee?
That's a very good question, and I'd say possibly you can, but you can't act on it.
Okay.
So what's the point?
Right.
Also, I would say that any intelligent employee and anybody you would want to hire would probably change their login information after they're
I would hope.
hired.
Is it all states that allow us to ask for applicants' passcodes?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because in your packet of materials you will see pending legislation in Massachusetts that already exists, I believe, in 28 states. There's already either proposed legislation or existing legislation in 28 states that makes it unlawful to require login information of applicants or employees. And the bill is in your materials. It says it shall be unlawful for an employer to require, request, suggest, or cause an employee or applicant to disclose a username, password, or other means for access or provide access through a username or password to a personal social media account or service, and it goes on from there. So there is a huge movement underway to make it just illegal by statute to access this information, to require access to this information as part of an applicant process or from your employees. This bill is pending in Massachusetts. My guess is that this will become law. This is a trend. And I think if you think about it, it makes sense. Social media is relatively new. We're all sort of feeling our way as to what makes sense. Currently, a huge majority of HR people do access social media to check people out. I mean, it's common practice. So it's interesting to see how legislatures around the company are reacting. They're reacting because people, interestingly, feel that their activities on social media are private.
So where this has come up over the last several years, I mean, you just saw the video on the boom on social media and how it's gotten into everyone, people's lives in so many ways. So many of you may have a social media policy in your employee handbook, and over the last 2 to 3 years, the National Labor Relations Board, through its Office of General Counsel, has gotten very aggressive in evaluating those kinds of policies for the kind of Section 7 rights, the concerted activity rights that Tamsin was talking about. So, and there's been a number of, national employers whose social media policies have been struck down and found to be an unfair labor practice, even though they're a non-union company, because of the kind of language that their social media policy contains.
Thank you. So if you check in your materials, there is a model social media policy there. And as Gary just mentioned, that came out of the National Labor Relations Board from their General Counsel's office. This is the recommended social media policy. So now switching to the issue of to what extent can you control employees' use of social media? Obviously, we're concerned about disparagement. We see situations where people leave the office, they may be disgruntled, and right away, they're getting on their blog, or they're getting on their Facebook account, or their whatever, tweeting, and they're talking about how bad their boss is, or how crappily they're treated at work, or the fact that there are cockroaches in the kitchen. So we are now looking at, again, concerted activity. Can employees work with each other for the aim of protecting each other in the workplace and mutually aiding each other in the workplace? They also have a right, of course, to unionize in the workplace. And so the National Labor Relations Board is looking at your right as an employer, they're balancing your right as an employer to protect your legitimate business needs, to protect your reputation, your goodwill, your relationships with your customers, your relationships with the public, your market share, against the rights of the employee to participate in concerted activity. So interestingly, I highly recommend to you, by the way, that you use this model policy, because it's very, very tricky as to what's legal and what's not legal to prohibit in your employees' use of social media. Some examples of portions of policies that were considered to be illegal, prohibited under the National Labor Relations Act. A directive to employees to avoid harming the image and integrity of the company. Now, you'd think that you could tell employees that you can't harm the image or integrity of the company. But no, the National Labor Relations Board said you cannot do that. So if you look in the policy, what we focus on is you can't use vulgar language, you can't harass someone, you can't discriminate against someone, you can't use language that would be construed as violent in some way. We have to be very specific about what it is people can't do, because they can complain about their job. They're allowed to. Prohibitions on employees posting online information about the employer that could be deemed material and non-public or confidential or proprietary. Again, you'd think that you could prohibit employees from posting confidential information. What you'll see in the policy is we have to more specifically define confidential information, because it may be that confidential information is information about what's going on behind closed doors in terms of treatment of employees. That they can talk about. Confidential information, that's your trade secrets, that's your business plans, that's your client information, your product information. That, of course, you can protect. So it's, as you can see, you have to really walk a fine line. Policy instructing employees that their online statements must be completely accurate and not misleading, and not reveal non-public information on any public site. Again, struck down, considered to be unlawful by the National Labor Relations Board. Provisions stating that offensive, this one I think is remarkable, offensive, demeaning, abusive, or inappropriate remarks are as out of place online as offline. That's a quote from a social media policy that the National Labor Relations Board ruled to be unlawful. Again, they are thinking, okay, in the broadest terms, could this chill concerted activity? Could this be construed by an employee as keeping them from talking about the terms and conditions of their employment in some way on social media? And if it can, then the National Labor Relations Board is going to say it's unlawful. So I definitely recommend that you take a look at the policy that's in there. It is coming directly from this government agency, and it's the way to go, because we have to walk a very fine line here.
Over the last couple of years, I've fielded a lot of calls from people like you, employers, who have found current employees, former employees posting online, whether Facebook, Twitter, on blogs saying derogatory things about the business, their boss, customers, suppliers, and the initial reaction of the employer, of the company, is, I found so-and-so writing derogatory things about the company. Well, if they don't like the company, we're going to, and publicly posting that, we're going to get rid of them. So that's the initial expected reaction. So I would just advise, our advice to you is to take a deep breath, call your trusted advisor, call us, call your lawyer, because you have to be very careful in this area in terms of navigating through, in terms of what action an employer may be able to take against an employee who is posting online or making public comments that you may feel are derogatory, disrespectful, or negatively impacting the goodwill of your company. There are like I said, the NLRB has taken a very expansive view of a legitimate concerted activity in the area of social media. So maybe you've all been fortunate you haven't had that yet, but at some point you will, because I field a lot of calls on this issue.
But suppose, sort of in a corollary to the Donald Sterling and the LA Clippers issue, suppose I come across somebody making racist remarks, or I come across somebody saying, I don't want to have black customers or white customers or whatever, and other employees bring this to my attention.
There's no, and Tammy will talk about, there's no licenses, there's no permission to engage in racially discriminatory communications. That is not protected concerted activity.
Right, and
So I
so
could fire them for that.
right. So specifically in your social media policy, you want to make sure that that you are focusing on what is illegal, what is not allowed, what is unacceptable, and that would be discriminatory, harassing, again, violent. And this is the stuff that we absolutely need to make unacceptable and act on it and be very clear about our policies on it.